Hello, I'm Wendy. Today I'm painting an ivy-covered winter tree with snow, and it's a tutorial suitable for beginners. A few years ago we had a wonderful snowfall in the area where I'm living, and there's a particular river where I walk the dog, and I took such a lot of photographs. I'm so glad I did, because since then we've really not had a nice snowfall, and I've been using these pictures quite a lot. I'm really drawn to these trees with the ivy growing on them and the snowfall and the shadows in the snow. I used this photograph as inspiration for a video that I did about a couple of years ago, a watercolour tutorial painting a snowy tree with just two colours, which were ultramarine and burnt sienna. I'm using this particular photograph and some of my others to do a study of another tree, but this time I'm going to concentrate more on the ivy on the tree and not so much on the background. And I particularly like the areas where you've got some of the green foliage, the remains of brambles and things, and also some of the grass and the earth showing through underneath the tree. It can look really complicated, as you can see at the base of this tree here. There are ways of tackling that, and maybe I'll do that in a later video, but I'm going to keep it very simple this time for beginners. You'll find the previous video on my channel, but I'll put a link to it in the description box below as well, if you'd like to take a look at it. I did quite a bit of practicing, if you like, before doing a recording of the painting for the tutorial. And this was one of the first ones I did. I quite like this actually. It's extremely loose, done very quickly. You've got the ivy and nice soft background on there. As I said, it was quite a spontaneous loose painting just to try and get some idea of what I wanted to talk about. And you can see that I was quite interested in the foreground there and getting the earth showing through the snow. So this one here, as you can see, I used some stronger colours in the background. I didn't really want to get it this dark, but it happens, doesn't it? You experiment and you go along with what's happening, and I quite liked it in the end. It is quite darker, and I've got a lot more warmth in there. But you've got the ivy again, and you've got the snow on the tree, and some of the earth in the foreground showing through. This was the third one that I did, and it was getting nearer to what I sort of had in mind with the tones of the background colours, and not too much snow on the tree. I'm showing you these because I think you'd be interested if you like painting like this and like the way that I work. It's just to point out that nothing is that easy. You can't just sit down, and I think people think if you just sit down and do a painting and everything's going to work. It isn't. It's all practice, and the more practice you do, the better you're going to get, and you're going to produce work that you yourself like. I like painting these. I really enjoy them, and painting these before I actually did the recording really helped. And I hope you're going to enjoy doing your own version of this tree. Or better still, using one of your own references when you've been out and about. You can pick a tree that's not in the snow, clearly, and then adapt it, which is one of the things that I did as well. I'm always looking at the shapes of trees and always take photographs of them and think, oh, that might be quite nice to put some snow on it and a bit of snow in the foreground. This was the painting that I recorded for the video, and the one that I'll be showing you and talking about. I'm not saying that I like it any better than any of the others. It's just that I did a bit practicing, so I sort of knew what I was doing a little bit more for the recording. And I hope you like it. I think some of the others have got things in them that are working. I do like a bit more orange maybe, so when you're painting you could maybe incorporate a bit more warmth in there. I think the amount of snow on the tree is about right in this one. I did overdo it a bit on some of the others, and I think I can use this one to demonstrate some of the ways of tackling quite a complicated subject, and I hope you learn something that you can put into your own paintings. So I started with quite a simple drawing here, and I'm using some masking fluid to put the snow, little bits of snow on the tree where it might have landed and settled, and also on the bank, a little bit on the bank there, so that I could separate it and have a nice white hard edge and separate it from the foliage. You don't need to use a lot of masking fluid. If you hate masking fluid, then you could always put a bit of gouache on at the end, an opaque white, so don't let the use of masking fluid put you off. It is really worth getting used to it because it is so useful in watercolour painting. I used a small roundish brush to put the little blobs of snow on there, and then I'm using an old rigger to put some very thin branches and just some little random marks to keep the area looking a little bit busy, because these riverbanks, they are busy with all the old foliage and brambles and things. When the masking fluid was totally dry, then I put on the background wash. It's a very, very dilute wash of burnt sienna to start with. You don't really need to wet the paper, I don't think, when you're putting these very light washes on, because it's almost like putting water on, isn't it? They're so thin. But people are always asking me, should I wet the paper first? I would say if you're putting a very light wash like this on, then no. But if you're putting a very strong wash on, then it's a good idea sometimes to wet the paper first. Now once this was on, then I put a few areas, just to bring the changes a bit, add a bit more warmth, I put a few areas darker. And then I mixed up a wash of ultramarine with a little bit of light red. I really like that mix. I think you keep a nice neutral sort of purpley colour for landscape. So I put some areas of this wash on there. Again, not too dark. It could stand for clouds or distant trees. And I put a little bit of dark along the bank there, so that the white snow would stand out against the background. Now, of course, when you're painting in watercolour, you can't paint lights over dark, so you've got to think all the time about your lightest lights and getting those on first. Now, a lot of the ivy on the tree was very dark, but there were light bits of it, and also I wanted some of the ivy to look greener, because in real life, rather than a photograph, you can see all these different colours and tones that you don't always get to see in your photographs, and I know that you see lots of light greens in the ivy. So I started off with a mix of something like raw sienna and cobalt blue, one of your nice greens that looks quite natural, to put on some of the first ivy leaves. It's a bit of imagination, if you like, this tree, but all the time I was looking at the references that I was using just to pick out little sort of nuances and little areas that you think you find quite interesting. And so bear that in mind. Always keep an eye on your reference and pick out these little areas that interest you. Like here, for example, there was some ivy sort of trailing down from the trunks. You can see that on the photograph that I've put there, and I rather like that. And as I usually do when I'm painting these sort of scenes, these little studies, I tend to dot around quite a bit with the brush, doing some random marks here and there. I let these first ivy leaves dry, and then I painted the trunk. Now, as you can see, I'm trying to avoid the light green areas where I painted the ivy leaves, and I'm putting on a wash of burnt sienna with a touch of ultramarine in there. The small bits of masking fluid I put on are resisting the paint. Now what I'm doing now is I've mixed up a stronger mix, and I'm working this little area of the trunk wet into wet. So you've got this darker mix sort of blending in with the warmer burnt sienna mix that I put on to start with. In order to do this and to keep the trunk wet into wet, I did little bits at a time. So I did little segments working upwards, painting around the leaves and adding the different tones of the brown. I thought this worked quite well, and I hadn't really done this in the past, but I sort of figured out this from doing those practice ones to start with, experimenting using different techniques. And I found that working like this, really, I think it does work quite well, doing these little areas and then dropping in the dark paint. If you tried to put the light area all over the tree, then it would certainly dry. It would still work. You'd still have the different tones in there, but I quite like them to blend into each other in this sort of wet into wet way. So I think that works quite well, and I think especially if you're just starting out in watercolour and you're probably working a lot more slowly than me, even though this section is speeded up ×2. I do work quite fast, and I think working in these little areas like this, give it a go if you've not worked like that before. So as I was working, I was looking at the tones of the tree, and I decided that in some places I could do with a little bit more dark, and so you'll see that I mix up some more dark to put in there. I mixed up a strong mix of ultramarine with burnt sienna. You could use burnt umber, and using a rigger brush, probably about it would be about a size 2, but it doesn't really matter. You can get riggers in different sizes, 1, 2 and 3 I think, and they all work pretty well. The number 2 I think is good for doing these sort of thin branches. Again, look at the reference, look at your trees, see where these are coming out, see how they split, and I think you'll find that once you start putting these on, that the painting really starts coming together. Try and get some overlap with some of the twigs and the little branches as well. I continued with this mix and looking again at my photographs. I was looking at some of the little bushes and some of the twigs that were growing underneath the trees there. One of my photographs had the sort of bit of a fence post there, which I rather liked. I thought it gave a different shape to everything else that I was doing, so I popped that in. And then I dotted around doing some sort of random marks to stand for some of the foliage leaves. As you can see then, I started on doing some of the darker ivy leaves. I've mixed up a very dark green here. It will be one of my greens using Prussian blue with burnt sienna, which gives you a very strong green. You can add a little bit of yellow or raw sienna to adjust it. I'll give you a link, or 1 or 2 links in the description box to videos that I've made on mixing greens if you're a little bit unsure about that. But Prussian blue is a very difficult blue to work with, to be quite honest. You've got to use very little of it, but it goes a long way. So a little bit of Prussian blue with some burnt sienna, and you can get these nice strong greens that you can use for the ivy. As I'm painting these, I'm trying to work around those light green areas that I put on to start with. It's quite easy to get carried away and cover them all up, so try to avoid that. But then you've got these sort of different layers working really in watercolour. You're building up some of the lighter greens, you're placing the darker greens on top, and the lighter greens are showing through. And I think it looks quite natural, and it's a very sort of easier way of working in watercolour, I think. Starting with all the light leaves, then painting around them with the dark and leaving the light showing through. So this is the stage when I started to do some work on the foreground. The good thing about watercolour, painting snow in watercolour, is that the white paper stands for the snow, so you have to do very little, which is really nice and it works out really well. But you've got to put something on this big white area, it's shadows, and in this case here I'm just painting some areas where the dark foliage or the earth and things like that are showing through the snow, where the snow's not landed on them. And I'm starting off by putting this burnt sienna with just a touch of ultramarine in there, and then you'll see I put some darker colour in there. So you've got these different tones working, and you'll find that a little bit later in the video, once you put some shadow colour on there, it looks like you've got sort of recesses in the snow, hopefully, where all this soil and the grass is sort of peeking through. You can see if I bring the camera in here that the wet into wet is working quite well, these darks. And they are very dark, don't be afraid of that. As long as they're very wet and are blending in with the first coat, then it's going to be fine, and they will dry back. I think if you're first starting out in watercolour, or you've not had a lot of practice, you're very loath to put these darks on, but don't be afraid of them. As I said, keep them nice and wet with lots of water in there. You can see interestingly here, can't you, that some of the masking fluid put on with that little rigger is cutting across this area, which is quite nice, and it will break that area up, and I think it looks quite natural to have these little branches going across. So I rubbed the masking fluid off when everything was dry, and you're always a bit afraid of what's going to be left, because masking fluid can leave you some rather odd shapes, but do not worry, we can sort them out. I think I overdid the masking on the tree trunk, and you'll see a little bit later that it's very easy to deal with that. I'm making a little bit of a start because this was really irritating me, this little bit that I missed on the trunk there. And then using very dark green or one of your browns, I'm just adding a few more twigs. You could put them underneath some of the white areas that were left, so it looks like you've got a twig with the snow on the top. And again, I'm just doing some of those extra bits of ivy that were dangling off the tree. Here I'm putting on some of the last of those autumn leaves that you can quite often see dangling off the twigs. You'll see later in the video I did it, in fact I did make those a bit warmer just to liven up the picture a bit. Now here I've got a shadow mix with the ultramarine and light red, and I'm putting it underneath some of these pieces, blobs, what would you call them, areas of snow that have settled on the tree. You can see that makes an awful lot of difference. It gives them quite a lot of form and makes them sit into the tree more as apart from just sort of being on the outside and not part of the tree trunk. As I said a little earlier in the video, I put some of the shadow mix above this area where the dark was. Hopefully that sort of maybe gives the impression that there's a bit of a recess there, sort of going in underneath the snow. And again, I dot things around in different areas, just little areas of shadow that you would find on the snow. And then being quite brave with lots of colour on your brush, lots of very transparent shadow colour. We put on a few marks to stand for some of the shadows coming from the branches on the tree. While these shadows were still wet, I did add a bit of a stronger colour because I felt it needed it, and a few random marks just to liven up the picture. And I did strengthen some of the little twigs that were in there. Now this bit I've speeded up. I felt there was far too much snow on that trunk, so as I said earlier in the video, it is quite easy to to adjust things, you can just paint around those white areas with your dark green or a bit of the tree mix, and you can make those areas of snow quite a lot smaller. So the painting's almost finished now. The only thing I did then was to put on some little patches of dark, which would stand for some of the rest of the soil and grass showing through the snow. I deliberately left these to last, because if you put those on before you put the shadow on, then even if they're dry, as you put the shadow colour on, it can smudge those dark areas. So it's a very good tip, is to, wherever you can, put the shadow area on first and then place your darker tones on top when that's dry. So this was the finished picture. As I said, I felt it needed a little bit more of the orange in there, just to add a bit of contrast, a bit more of the complementary colours to what was going on. And so I strengthened some of the raw sienna, no, I'm sorry, I strengthened some of the burnt sienna bits that I had in there, those leaves and things, with a little bit of cadmium orange, which I think livened things up a little bit. I do hope you enjoyed the video. I hope that you learned something from it, as always, and picked up some tips. I hope you picked up some tips for your own paintings. I enjoy painting these trees. You'll probably see more of them, and some more winter scenes. If you do enjoy my videos, then do subscribe to my channel and you won't miss any future content. Bye for now.